Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we say hello to Sunil Dutt of Salt Security. Hey, Sunil, how are you doing?
Hey, Eric, all good. Great to be here and lovely to talk about the wonderful world of APIs.
Yes, and thanks so much for joining. So today we'll talk about API sprawl, this notion that APIs are, like a friend of mine said, like popping up like mushrooms because they are so popular and they're so useful, right? So that's a good thing, but it's also kind of problematic. And today we want to talk a little bit about what API sprawl is, what it means for you, and what you should do about it. Let's maybe start with a brief history of how APIs started and how kind of the good old days looked like before we got into maybe the place where we are nowadays. So what do you think, Sunil? What is the starting point for this whole story of the API sprawl that we see today?
Yeah, great point, Eric. And I would say, the enormous amount of digitalization that we're seeing from all the customers that we're talking to. Everybody has embarked on their own version of what they call digital transformation. We see a lot of it got accelerated actually due to COVID-19, facilitating a lot of working from home. Some of it
Yeah.
actually got stalled, and customers are now actually embarking on that journey. But at the end of the day, it means that everybody that we talk to, everybody is using a lot of software, consuming a lot of cloud technology, using a lot of microservices, and tying all that stuff together. And that's where the API all of a sudden becomes super important.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's digital transformation really is what, like you said, whatever you exactly mean by this. But this general trend is definitely something that has been driving this. Just the ability to build so many more digital value chains or to tap
Yeah.
into new digital channels that you have, all these kinds of things. So back then, before we kind of went down that road where we are today, like what did the API security world look like in sort of simpler times?
Yeah. Well, the world before all that digitalization, actually from a security perspective, from a hacker's perspective, wasn't that interesting because companies would have few APIs. Those would often be very static APIs, didn't undergo a lot of changes, and those APIs did not have access to any sensitive data. So from an attack surface perspective, it was not interesting. But like you just mentioned, right, the new world with all the digitalization, all of a sudden these APIs are represented in multitudes, hundreds, thousands, and they also have access to a lot of sensitive data nowadays. If you just pick up your mobile phone and look at the way you're interacting with your bank, all of that stuff is flowing over the API. So now the hackers all of a sudden are shifting their attention because hey, there's an attack surface that is suddenly super interesting, and that's what
Pretty
we're
juicy, yeah.
pretty juicy. And unfortunately, we've had multiple examples now also here in Europe of breaches that happen due to leaky APIs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's kind of stories weekly, I would say, in
Yeah.
some shape or form, right? Some of them worse, some of them not so bad, but there
Yeah.
definitely are many. And and I think in the good old days, also because you had much fewer APIs, like you said, right? In many cases, you probably reasonably could make the claim that we know all the APIs that we have, and we manage them through some piece of infrastructure, oftentimes some sort of gateway that you would have,
Yeah.
and that would be good enough because it was a relatively small set of interfaces that you had to deal with. Now that picture, I think, has changed. And Xway, we did a study, I think about 1.5 years ago, around multi-gateway scenarios, right? Just
Mm.
asking organizations about how many gateways do you have? And other organizations actually have been doing the same kind of service. And I think it's interesting nowadays to see that in larger organizations now, having more than one gateway already is more the norm than the exception. And that already maybe shows us in which direction we're going, right?
Yeah. That's so spot on. I was actually talking to one of our customers a couple of weeks back, and they even mentioned that they completely lost sight because they even use or outsource by using external developers that get in and develop a whole bunch of APIs, put it into production, don't leave behind a good catalog, and then leave again. And so they know there are a lot of APIs. They don't have the visibility, and they also know that they have multiple gateways because every department or through an acquisition, maybe it's introducing new technology, and new gateways are part of that.
Mhm.
So it's becoming quite complex. I can tell you.
Yes. And there's this notion, actually, I made a video a little while ago now, I just remember that, about shadow APIs and zombie APIs, right? So now you have these scary terms, and I think it's interesting to just think about where they come from. And I think just because it becomes a pattern that you see more and more. So this multi-gateway scenario is one thing, and to some extent, what you said is right, that it's already problematic because now you don't have like a unified view of all of your APIs, which is probably not great, but at least in theory, right, you know which ones you have because you just look at the multiple gateways that you have. But things are worse, right? The shadow APIs are so what's that part all about, where it's not just multi-gateway, the problem, so to speak, is even bigger than that?
Yeah, it's absolutely bigger than that. One would assume that all the API traffic would actually pass all of those gateways. Unfortunately, that is not the case
Yes.
today.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is, with many of our customers, is when we do, for instance, one of the capabilities with Salt is we do a full discovery of all the APIs. So we look at third-party APIs, anything external facing, in-house developed, but also what you mentioned, the shadow or the zombie APIs. And we find many more APIs in that traffic than the customer was actually aware of. And that's a challenge for multiple reasons. Why? Because, well, one, they're not managed. Obviously, that's a big challenge. But secondly, from a security perspective, you cannot protect what you cannot see. And particularly the ones that you mentioned, those zombie APIs that are still running in your infrastructure, but have never been managed or patched and updated, are basically a huge, door open at the back where for any malicious insider or an external hacker to just come in and do their thing.
Yeah, those are actually the perfect targets, right? Because, like you said, they may not be patched, right? They run on outdated software components. So even if they are secured through something, right, they might not use security mechanisms that are still up to date. Now, one question I have for you, because you are working at Salt, which is specializing in this kind of thing. Do you remember going to a customer, asking them how many APIs they have, and they gave you a number, and that turned out to be the correct number? Did that ever happen?
Actually, honestly, no. So there, yeah,
Thank you.
and that's a big challenge. We actually get two answers. The first answer is the honest one. I don't know,
Yeah,
which is
we don't know exactly.
honestly, which is not strange, right? Because many customers
Yeah.
don't even know how many assets they have, let alone how many
Mm-hmm.
guys. But
Mm-hmm.
the second answer that we sometimes get is a ballpark figure. Um, and once we start working with the ballpark figure, we often find, 2, 3, 4x more, which is for the customers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even if it's a ballpark, I mean, it's kind of from a security perspective, right? It's like it's hard to say we, in a responsible way, we secure around 200 APIs. We're not quite sure how many there are, but we're doing a good job at securing them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
That should
that's,
get you thinking.
it should definitely get you thinking. I mean, we're living in a world of what we call zero trust. That's commonly used in the world of cybersecurity. So good enough or thinking that you have a view is simply not good, right? It's very black and white from that perspective. Either you know what you're protecting and you need to know what your estate looks like, or you're just
Mm-hmm.
simply not, because you just
Mm-hmm.
need one back door, and it can be very damaging.
Yeah, so I think, as a takeaway, we could definitely say API sprawl is very real. You see it everywhere.
Yeah.
You see it more because you're directly in that business. I hear about it because I'm in the API management business, right? But we both, I think, we see it all the time. And then what's your typical recommendation around, okay, now you've done the discovery part and you figure out you actually do have more than you thought you have. So what's the next step then?
Yeah, so first of all, looking at the ones that you then discover that you apparently do have, is it still necessary to actually have them running in your environment, or should they actually be repurposed or be terminated completely? Those are decisions
Mm-hmm.
that you'll have to make. From a security perspective, probably you'll find many more APIs that are already active in runtime, and particularly the ones that are in runtime are getting access to a lot of sensitive information. So one of the things that you should be looking at is the API perhaps even leaking sensitive information, or maybe even overexposing it for any hacker to come in and get their hands on that sensitive data. So from a prevention perspective, it's really good to take those runtime APIs, apply a API security solution to them that will thoroughly have a look at, are they being put into production safely? Are they at least safeguarded against the most advanced threats that we're seeing out there? And those are, by the way, documented nowadays in the OWASP API top 10. Um, and it's not easy. I do have to tell you that, Eric, it's not an easy thing to do, because if you want to really find anomalies in that traffic, you need to fully understand what normal traffic should look like. You need to have a baseline. And that's where we come in from Salt Security. We can create that baseline, analyze a ton of data and information, and then offer that level of protection to that customer.
So it's not just discovering the APIs, it's also then making sure that whatever happens, you're discovering basically patterns of abnormal behavior, right? So that's kind of I would say that's an additional step, right? Past that initial discovery, to also say what's normal for this API and what is not normal.
Exactly. And not even just the API. You should be looking at the API, all the subsequent users, even the subsequent endpoints that are generating the traffic. So, trying to analyze a ton of traffic, and I'm not talking about traffic of a day or a week or a month. It's going to be over a very long period of time before you can create that solid baseline. And I can tell you we're pretty good at that. Specifically, we actually created a big data architecture at the back end that really does all that analytics and number crunching and can deliver results within a couple of hours, right? So the time to value is pretty quick. But from that moment, you immediately know what is happening with your runtime APIs and where you probably have to make a couple of changes and amendments to make sure that you are in production safely.
Probably, yeah. The recommendation. We highly recommend to,
I'm putting it
get
nicely.
to that part. Yeah. No, it's a good point. So I think that's already, that covers our topic of API sprawl pretty well, right? So it's real. You see it in pretty much all organizations, from relatively small ones, definitely to big ones, right? And if you don't manage it I would say in an intentional way, your risk of getting security problems at some point, right, is pretty high.
Absolutely. And the desired outcome would also be that once you get to a point where you have that visibility, they're secured, you're managing it, so you have that visibility. Obviously, you would like to get to a point where you can then actually consciously decide to take pre-production APIs and apply the shift left methodology, where you will harden them before you actually put them into production. So also be preemptive from that perspective and apply some proactive security. And that's where we can help our customers as well.
Yeah, then that's going forward, right? So the sprawl management is kind of like fixing what you have, and then going forward, probably improving your practices. Yes.
Exactly. So. Yeah.
Great. Sunil, thanks so much for joining. I think that was really interesting, and I think it's something that hopefully everybody who is in charge of APIs in any shape or form, right, they take this into account and they maybe really think about, do we know how many APIs we have, and are we sure that this is the right answer? And in all likelihood, it may not be the right answer.
Yeah, which is perfectly fine, but from there we can take it and we can help our customers, both of us actually. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks again for joining, Sunil, for taking the time for explaining this to us. And thanks everybody for watching. I hope you liked it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing. And with that, until next time, keep getting APIs to work. Bye, everybody.
Bye.